thank you for your courage in sharing your story as part of your question. He said, as a veteran with PTSD, what would my mom do to continue to support him and all of our veterans? And then he pointed out that he's noticed that my mother's opposition at times seems quite anti-veteran, and recently was deeply disrespectful of our men and women who have served our country and whose service continues to be part of their lives through PTSD. So my mom thinks we need to do a few things. One, we need to fully fund the VA, and we need to allow veterans who want help and are raising their hands and saying, I need help, particularly kind of with mental health, to be able to get care outside of the VA system if there are waiting times. Because we should not expect our veterans to wait for the care that they need. And we also need to be doing more to invest in what we know works, which for many veterans is one-on-one therapy, and for other veterans is family-based therapy. So we need to have more options that really are meeting the needs of our veterans and our veterans' families, whether they're veterans who have just served and are coming home today, or are our oldest veterans who have been dealing with PTSD for decades. I find it always helpful to ask people what they care most about. Because I think we all do care about a lot of things, but probably some things are more top of mind for us than others. So whether that is college affordability, or childcare affordability, or mental health coverage, and then try to make the case rooted in that one issue. And if someone says, well, I care about everything, I hope that you would make the case about what my mom has done, even with unlikely allies. Because we know that kind of come November 9th, and really kind of come January of 2017, whomever we elect, and I'm going to work really hard, so that's my mom, we'll have to work with people across the aisles to really get things done. So I hope it would matter to voters that my mom worked with Republicans to pass the Children's Health Insurance Program, worked with Republicans to double funding for early childhood education, worked with Republicans to expand the VA system, because we need that type of real problem-solving leadership, but also pragmatic leadership where someone's willing to work with whomever she needs to get the job done. So thank you for her question. She's graduating in May, so please give her a round of applause. And her question was about my mom's college affordability plans, and particularly how would it affect her at a private institution. Well, my mom has articulated something that she's calling the New College Compact. I think that's actually, in some ways, not the best name because it includes graduate school. So I don't know what your plans are for graduate school, but I think that's an important part of the conversation, because for so many of us, our ambitions don't stop after we graduate from college. So my mom is proposing kind of two kind of separate tracks for people who already have debt today, and then people who are in high school or middle school or already in the workforce who are thinking about going to college later. So for people who have debt today, kind of there are just a few kind of simple things she thinks we have to do immediately. One, for people who have federal loans, that those should be reset to the lowest prevailing interest rate. And that's important because interest rates are really low right now. And she thinks we should pass a law banning the federal government from making a profit from student loans. Second thing is that she thinks that anyone and everyone should be able to repay their loans as a percentage of their income. And that's really important to my mom, because when she got out of law school, she paid for law school through a combination of work-study grants and loans. And when she got out of law school, Yale, where she just graduated from, that held her student loans, said to her, well, as long as you are working in the public interest, you have a grace period. You don't have to pay back your loans. But as soon as you start to earn an income, you have to pay back a percentage of your income. And I literally remember the day when I was a kid where my mom paid off her student loans. and like what a proud moment that was for her. And then as I got older, I realized how important her experience working for the Children's Defense Fund after law school was to her life's work and really to who she is as a person. And she never could have taken her job at the Children's Defense Fund, where, I mean, she said yesterday she thinks she earned $14,000 a year, if she had had to immediately start repaying her loans. So this is really personal to my mom. And she thinks, regardless of whether you've graduated from a public institution or a private institution, if you have student debt, you shouldn't have to pay back more than 10% of your income in loan repayment. And if you're willing to do work, like the work that she felt called to do at the Children's Defense Fund, so if you're a public interest lawyer, or if you're a nurse, or a doctor, or a police officer, or a firefighter, and particularly if you're working in high-need areas, whether that's a Native American reservation or a rural area, an inner city, that service itself should count for your loan repayment. And we already have models of doing that. We need to build on those. And then looking forward for people who are thinking about going to school or going back to school, you mentioned community college. My mom does believe that anyone should be able to go to community college tuition free. And she believes that anyone who comes from a family making $125,000 or less, which is about 90% of families here in Iowa, should be able to go to a state college or university tuition free. But she does believe that anyone should be able to graduate from a private institution debt-free. So whether you're willing to work in work-study programs or have a sliding scale of available loan support and relief. So I hope you'll go online and look at her college calculator, because you can type in your family income, you can type in what loans you have already, you can type in kind of what your tuition burden is to see how her plans would affect you if you were 5 years younger and thinking about going to school, and affect you today as you're thinking about graduation kind of for the next 5 or 15 years of your life. So thank you for your question. Thank you. So thank you for being a teacher assistant. For those of you who couldn't hear, she said that she works in high need school here in Dubuque, and it's an elementary school and many of her students are afraid. So I think a few things. One, I'm grateful to know that clearly, given what you say about the role that you have in the school, there is somewhat of a supportive system for students. And she's nodding her head saying, absolutely, that's not true in a lot of schools. In so many schools across our country, we're expecting teachers to be all things to all students. I was in Flint a couple weeks ago, and in Flint last year, in the entire public school system, there was 1 school nurse and 2 social workers. So in a city where we know that there has been widespread poisoning of children, the city didn't have the resources to provide the early intervention that we know is so crucial to helping blunt the effects of lead poisoning so that every child has every possible chance. So my mom thinks for those places where we know there's a high percentage of Title I students, so students that are on free and reduced lunch plans, which is our best metric of poverty, the federal government needs to be making direct investments. That happened in the 1990s when my father was president. He empowered the Department of Education to make direct investments in schools and in school districts that had a high percentage of Title I students to do things like get mold out of schools, to rebuild infrastructure, to provide supplemental funding for things like school nurses so that teachers can get back to teaching, but that we're surrounding students with all of the support that any one of us would hope any of our children would have. So I think that's an important part of your question. The second part of your question is we need criminal justice reform in our country. And we need criminal justice reform that ensures that everyone is respected and valued equally under the law. And I don't know how many of you saw the vice presidential debate last night, But Governor Pence said there's no such thing as implicit bias. And we know that's not true. I mean, all of the evidence says quite the contrary. You know, the first speech that my mother gave in her campaign on policies that she wanted to tackle and reform was actually on criminal justice reform, on what we needed to do as a society, on what we needed to do to support our police officers who are often in situations those of us who are not police officers could never imagine, and what we needed to do to ensure that our police officers were trained on implicit bias, trained to de-escalate, and also what we need to do to work on gun violence prevention. Because one of the challenges in our country is that we do have an epidemic of gun violence. I mean, if anything else were killing more than 33,000 Americans, we would have an outcry. And gun violence prevention does not mean that we threaten the Second Amendment, does not mean that we take away any guns from any law-abiding person, but it does mean that we stop people who shouldn't have guns from having them. Like people on the terrorist watch list who shouldn't have guns. So we need to do a lot to ensure that more schools have the support that it sounds like you have in your school district, which I think is something that hopefully other communities can learn from. But we also need to reform the criminal justice system, because no child should worry that either their zip code or the color of their skin or candidly their immigration status will be their destiny.